So perhaps I'm the first one to say Happy Invasive Species Month to you. It's actually an annual celebration in BC for everyone working on invasive species. It's usually an opportunity for folks like us to promote our message and events across BC, but I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for the varied work that you do on invasive species in your community, in your personal life, or for your employer. I think it's also a nice chance to kind of look around and give appreciation for all of the hard work that everybody's doing on this really important conservation issue. So happy Invasive Species Month. There is a link down there. So the Invasive Species Council of BC's got information on events happening all around the province during the month of May in celebration of BC Invasive Species Month. So you can check that out for more information and also use that resource to possibly promote any events that you're doing this month as well. So here is the agenda for today. We've got a couple of guest speakers, and then in the middle, we have a really small business meeting, which is required of societies like ours once every calendar year. So that'll be our AGM portion. The following documents are available on our website, and I'll get Larissa to pop that website link into the chat if you want to open up any of those documents. So the agenda document, the second page, has details on our speakers and their presentations today. And then the other documents will be quickly reviewing during the AGM portion. So we've got those few business meetings to cover. Also during an AGM, we'll be inviting members to vote on some of those documents. So membership is free. It's open to anybody. Our AGM is the start of the membership year. And so by participating in the online voting, you'll be confirming your membership with the ISCMV. And if you're not interested in voting or becoming a member of the ISCMV, you can just simply abstain from that voting part. So for those that might be new to attending an event hosted by the Invasive Species Council of Metro Vancouver, just a bit of background on us. We've been established since 2006 as a nonprofit society, and our job is really to help all of you do your jobs better. We answer questions, we connect people to resources, we host regional events like this. We do a lot of presentations, develop resources, a lot of training with government staff and volunteers. We also are out there on the grounds helping to coordinate stewardship work. We have a small seasonal field crew, and we also do some consulting and special project work as well. So we're involved in many different initiatives and groups within Metro Vancouver. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm really pleased to welcome our first speaker for today. So Dr. Catherine Tarasoff is here with us, and some of you might know her from her yellow flag iris research, but she's actually here today to talk about a Metro Vancouver targeted grazing feasibility assessment. So Catherine graduated from Thompson Rivers University in 1998, after which she attended Oregon State University and earned a PhD in crop sciences with an emphasis on weed science and a minor in rangeland ecology. She went on to become an invasive plant ecologist at Michigan Technological University and recently moved back to BC and now runs her own consulting company called Agrowest Consulting. And she's also an adjunct and sessional instructor at Thompson Rivers University in the Department of Natural Resource Sciences. She's been a professional agrologist for 20 years, and I'm so excited that she can be here. I just love working with Catherine, and ironically, she was actually scheduled to present at our AGM in April 2020, an in-person event that of course got canceled due to COVID. So she's speaking on a different topic, but I'm really glad that finally she's able to attend one of our events. So welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute myself and I'll start my screen share. I recognize a lot of names, and that's just so cool for me because it shows what a tight and connected community we are. So I've already given Tasha the heads up that my internet is perpetually unstable. So if everybody that's got their videos on can just keep moving your heads around, then I know if you freeze, then I'm frozen and I'll just stop talking. So yeah, most of you I know through my work with Yellow Flag Iris, but last year I took on a project with Metro Vancouver Parks to do a feasibility study of the possibility for using targeted grazing in Metro Vancouver Parks. And I have two co-authors, Amanda Miller from Palouse Rangeland Consultants and Tammy Salmon, who's a longtime targeted grazing practitioner. And I think she is here with us today. So she'll be a great resource to answer any questions that I may not be able to. And I would like to acknowledge that I am coming from Secwepemc traditional territory in Kamloops today. And I am grateful for that. So the focus of the work was to produce to compile all the information that we know about the possibility of using targeted grazing. And targeted grazing in this context really is animals to eat invasive species. And through this process, we developed two reports. One is a technical report, which Amanda took the lead on, and it's a very, very comprehensive, over 110 pages long report that compiles all the literature to date on targeted grazing for invasive species around the world, really. She has well over 100 references in this document. Most of you are likely not going to want to read this document, but you will want to read the summary report, which is a small 20-page high-level overview document that really tries to summarize the contents of the technical report into something much more concise. If there are things in the summary report that you're interested in learning more about, then you can go to the technical report and read in great detail about those specific topics. They are available at metrovancouver.org. You need to search for invasive species, and then the first hit that you get would lead you to these reports on their website. So the process that we went through for this study was, first, we had to assess which species are suitable, and we focused on 4 candidate animals: cows, pigs, goats, or sheep. And goats, but far and large, by way, are the best animals for targeted grazing. So within the technical report, we have a full assessment of the pros and cons of each of the species, but goats by far are the best, and they're the most versatile, and they also suffer from less toxicity issues. Some animals have a very sensitive digestive systems. So the remainder of the presentation today is really only focused on goats, because that became our top. That's our candidate targeted grazing animal that we're working with. The next thing was to whittle down. Metro Vancouver has 13 invasive species that they have best management practices published for. So of those 13, we wanted to know which ones are suitable for targeted grazing. So of those 13, 7 species are relevant or even suitable for targeted grazing. We have hogweed, the ivies, Himalayan balsam, wild chervil, Himalayan blackberry, Scotch broom, and purple loosestrife. And then you can see this color coding on the right in terms of how well the control would work on these different species, and it goes from high to kind of low moderate efficacy. And again, that rating is described in much greater detail in the technical report. All the tables I present today come from the summary report, but the technical report has full discussion on how we've come up with these efficacy ratings. And then it even has a section on why the other 6 are not suitable. And it could be things like Eurasian water milfoil is a submerged aquatic and animals are not going to swim around and eat it. Could be toxic. Could be something like Japanese knotweed, where when you use animals for targeted grazing, you actually promote growth of the plant. So there's different reasons why the other 6 didn't make the cut, and you would have to read the technical report for the specifics about each species and why it's not appropriate. Okay, next is like quite a large table. So once we got down to our 7 species, we needed to compare different IPM, that's integrated pest management options, and the efficacy of those options for each species. So there is just a phenomenal amount of literature that went into creating this final table. And we have across the top the treatment options: targeted grazing, chemical, mechanical, manual, biocontrol, that's really insects, cultural control, and then what the final treatment recommendations could be for that species. Then they're also color-coded based on how well they work, based on the literature kind of resources that are available, and the cost per square meter to use that option. So there's a lot of information here, and I'm going to focus specifically on Blackberry because the case study that is in the technical report, we did do a full a targeted grazing program that could be implemented at Aldergrove Regional Park, specifically for Himalayan blackberry. So I've taken Himalayan blackberry out of that previous table, and I just want to talk a little bit about some of the details that need to be considered if somebody is considering targeted grazing. So if we look at targeted grazing here, we see that the cost is from 15 cents to $2 per meter squared. Now, these are very general costs, and of course they came from the literature. So it depends on what's available in the literature. So there's quite a range in costs, and that depends on the site that you're treating. And we also see mowing, hand pulling as an option, bulldozing, chemical treatment, fire is not a good option. And so if you were to compare mowing with targeted grazing, it would be easy to look at this table and say, well, mowing is so much cheaper, 13 to 50 cents a square meter versus 15 to $2. Well, I just do the math and I'll mow. But you need to really consider the site that you're working at and your land management goals. A flail mower is not going underneath the trees. There's not a chance you're going to get a mower in the trees. A mower is not going to go on steep terrain, rocky terrain with stumps or wet, sort of seepage areas. So it's not just about the cost. It really is about focusing on your land management goals and the versatility of your treatment options. So I just really want to highlight that this table is in the report, but you as the land manager need to really think bigger than just the bottom line dollars that are presented in this table, because it is such a complicated, as you know, issue working with invasive species. Now, there is this interesting number that 100 goats in a herd can remove about 1,000 square meters of blackberry in a day. So that's really a great, just a great number when you're doing your planning. If you're working with blackberries, that's a number you can grab onto. Of course, that number also is just a rule of thumb. If your blackberry is growing up and over trees, over fences, blackberry, as we know, could be 20 feet up in the air, then you just have to know that treatment, that amount that they can treat is going to go down per day. And then the fact that using goats is not a silver bullet, it's not a one-time treatment option. So you will get better results if you go back twice in a season and if you go back 3 consecutive years. So it's not a kind of one time and you're done treatment effect, not for blackberries. For some species, you have much better success rates with single treatments, but blackberry is not one of those. So it's really important to understand, if you're going to use targeted grazing, it's really important to understand the biology of the plant that you're working with. And there's a lot of information in the technical report about the biology of each of the 7 species that we reviewed, the biology of the species that you're working with, the ecology of the site that you're working in, and how your treatment option can fit in the best way. Of course, also keeping in mind that none of these treatment options are mutually exclusive. You can use them all. And in fact, you get the best results when you use the best treatment option for the site that you're working on. So a lot of times in IPM, we think it's one or for treatment options, but it isn't. Put them together, right? Okay, so once that part was through and we kind of gotten past the science and the economics of the study, the next really big consideration for anybody that wants to use goats in particular is that there is a lot of planning that has to occur ahead of time. Goats, you don't just drop them off and pick them up at the next fence line and take them home. So some of these considerations are super easy, right? Like make sure you have a contract with a grazing whoever your grazer is, make sure you have a contract lined up. Some of them are much more in depth, and there's this whole section on legal requirements. So you have to have a bylaw in place. Goats just can't roam around. You need a bylaw for them. You need to make sure goats usually come with a guardian dog that will be off leash. That's how they operate. So you need to make sure that that's in place, that wherever you're working, that you have a bylaw that's specific so that the guardian dog can be off leash and do their job. There's a lot of partnerships, a lot of coordination that has to happen ahead of time, public education. You need to make sure that the animal is safe. There's a whole section on animal husbandry. The goats have to be safe. Otherwise, it's just going to be mayhem. So if you have any predators in a park, you need to make sure that you're aware of where the predators are and that the herder is able to set up whatever systems need to be in place to protect their herd. And this table goes on. There's 2 pages. So there's a lot to consider. Some things are really simple and straightforward, like to reduce the spread of weeds, just hold the goats in a pen for a day before you move them onto their next site. Or if the herder is taking the goats back to a base camp, then just make sure that they're aware of that they have proper protocols in place to make sure that they don't spread any weeds from the site they were working at in Vancouver to their home base. So the more planning that you do before engaging in a targeted grazing program, the obviously your better likelihood of success. So I just want to do a quick summary of the pros and cons of targeted grazing. So a really huge pro is that goats will eat just about anything. They have incredible tolerance for things that you would never imagine a goat would eat, like yellow star thistle, if anybody's familiar with that plant. They will eat it. And they only consume about 20% of their diet in grass. So they really are a targeted grazer. They leave the grass for the most part, and they target the shrubs and the broadleaf forbs. So most of our weeds are broadleaves. So that's really great. They are light on the land. So this picture here is the famous climbing tree goats of Morocco. But goats are light on the land. They are incredibly nimble. They can get into places that no machinery or even person could get into, even with a backpack sprayer. And they have an incredible amount of energy. So they can work long days without being fatigued, so long as they are well fed and watered and have adequate safety for nighttime rest. Now, a very serious con of using goats is that there is a shortage of goat herds in Western North America. And goat herds aren't something that you just get. You have to build one. So a goat practitioner would have to build a herd in order to become a targeted grazing business. So there's a shortage of goats. You need to use specific goats as targeted grazers, so not just any old goat will do. So it's really important, if you're considering using targeted grazing, that you actually start a couple of years in advance, establishing relationships, getting all your logistical sort of pieces together, so that when you're ready, you have a goat herder kind of in your back pocket. For the technical report, we interviewed 14. We could find 14 targeted grazing businesses, and we went all the way to Saskatchewan and down into the Western US, and there was 14. And really, there's 5 that are willing to work in the Lower Mainland. Some of those come from Alberta, and they like the Lower Mainland because they can use the Lower Mainland as kind of their out of, like their shoulder season. They can capture some work in the shoulder season. Goats require, like I said, a lot of logistical planning. It's not unreasonable. It's just don't underestimate or kind of gloss over that part. Otherwise, the safety of the goats is at risk, and of course, public support needs to be in place. Goats require supervision, a safe place for sleeping, and access to water. So the more of the things that you can provide on site for the goat herd, the cheaper the day rate is likely to be. If the goat herder has to haul in water, then that's an expense that they need to account for. If you have municipal water on site, then that's one less thing they need to worry about. And of course, goats are not a silver bullet. And we, as invasive species managers, know that there really is no silver bullet. So you need to plan for multiple treatments, understand the biology of the plant, understand how many treatments you're going to need. This is all plant specific. So for Himalayan blackberry, it's 3 to 5 years of consecutive grazing, and you can reduce the number of consecutive years if you increase from 1 to 2 in-season grazes. Okay, I really would like to give out a special thanks to Lori Bates-Frymel, the Senior Regional Planner for Metro Vancouver Parks, and Janice Jarvis, the Natural Resource Management Specialist who oversees Alder Grove Regional Park. The two were absolutely wonderful partners to work with, and provided edits on the 2 reports that were written. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Your internet was great. You didn't skip in and out for me at all. So
I was waiting for the head bobs on the side.
I don't see any questions coming in, but please feel welcome to pop those into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question directly as well.
Wouldn't mind popping in a few questions if I could.
Sure.
Nice. Okay. Thanks very much, Catherine. Great presentation and a great summary of the report. Just a couple things I wanted to highlight that you didn't mention, but were a couple of things that we brought to the attention of our elected officials, is the fact that because of the fact that there's no local herds, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with this as an option were 2 to 5 times mowing. So that was one of the biggest considerations, I think, for our Climate Action Committee to consider whether this is a good option, or we should be pursuing other methods. But appreciate your comments on the fact that a combination of methods is always preferred for integrated pest management. And another thing that that we highlighted when we were presenting to our elected officials was was the fact that because of all the logistical requirements, the complexity associated with this method, the city of Edmonton had done a 3-year trial in one of their parks, and they actually hired a coordinator. So that was an additional $30,000 expense, a part-time coordinator to deal with all the logistics. And so that was something that we have to consider in terms of if we want to go forward with targeted grazing. And just another thing, I know you mentioned that there was some pros associated with goats related to the fact that they eat everything, and that's one of the other considerations that we're considering, is that may not necessarily be a good thing if we're wanting them to target a specific plant for invasive species targeting, but they may actually eat off-target plants that we're wanting to keep those native plants that are beneficial. So those are my comments for now.
Yeah, and some of that stuff is covered in the technical report.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's great. Like, we do have a whole section on carbon emissions. So if people want to read and look at all the calculations, we've worked with Metro Vancouver. It is pretty in depth. And it also brings up a really interesting discussion that we've had, you know, with Lori and Janice and my crew, is this whole notion of getting together to try to support a local targeted grazing business. So that's, you know, that's out of the scope of this study, but it does seem like there's enough interest that that could be an option if people wanted to move in that direction of supporting the development of a targeted grazing business in the Lower Mainland.
Bob Drinkwater here. Just there was a goat breeder in Chilliwack on the Greenville area there that they did do a trial for BC Hydro up towards Stave Lake there, and there are a few goat breeders in the Sumas Chilliwack Prairie area.
Yeah, we interviewed 14 practitioners, and you can see the results of the interviews in the back of the technical report. And it's interesting, you know, some people are breeding specifically for meat goats, or, you know, like the targeted grazing goat is different than other goats. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that breeding business is still in business, and if they're breeding for targeted grazing or other goat.
Yeah, well, this particular farm wasn't breeding for targeted grazing, and they have the farm went up for sale and it's gone. But when the fellow from Alberta, I think it was, came over, did a demonstration at UFV in Chilliwack, there were quite a few people, not quite a few, there's maybe 4 or 5 people who raised goats on small scale that were quite interested. And we had I thought was a fairly nice spot for them. It was Himalayan balsam up under a hydropower line up towards Stave Lake there. But it did, I'm not sure exactly what they tried. They tested it, and it didn't go any further than the test.
Yeah.
Catherine, we have a few other questions in the chat that I'd like to get to. First, from David, for a prickly species like Blackberry, are there special training requirements for the goats?
Well, Tammy, if you want to jump in on this, I don't think there is. I think the goats just kind of jump right in. But the herder does have to prepare the site a little bit so that the goats can eat it. So if the Blackberry is growing up into trees, then the herder needs to come in advance and cut paths into the Blackberry and kind of like hook the Blackberry and pull it down, so that the goats can then, you know, like almost like it's described like spaghetti, right? Then they can just chew along the Blackberry like they're eating spaghetti. But if the Blackberry is sort of impenetrable, then the herder has to cut paths into it.
Thank you. From Carrie, thanks for a great summary. Were you surprised by any findings while compiling this report or from speaking with the grazers?
Again, I'm going to say if Tammy's on the line, that would be great. What I was surprised for myself about is that there's a lot of people doing targeted grazing on a really small scale. So there were some small herders that said, oh yeah, you know, they qualified for the interview, but they really only had like 20 goats and they weren't really prepared to leave their hometown. And so I was surprised at how much it's happening, but it is just, you know, there's very few companies that are doing it on a large scale like Rocky Mountain Goats. That's probably the person that came to Stake Lake. Oh, there's Tammy.
Hi. Good job, Catherine. Hello, everyone. I'll just jump in quickly to answer a couple of these questions specifically. So grazing goats develop a palate for terribly tasting, prickly, awful things that nothing else will eat. And they really, in a sense, do have to be trained to travel well, to handle high stress environments, and to learn to eat new things, because sometimes they will have never seen the plant that you're asking them to eat, even though they can eat it. For example, some of these Alberta goats will have not seen Blackberry. They will eat it. That's up to the herder to manage them and introduce them properly to the plant and do it at the most palatable time for goats. So timing is involved, a little bit of training, really just enhancing what a goat will eat and encouraging them to eat it if it's new. And then just managing what a goat naturally does to our use is really what the whole targeted grazing movement is, and managing them well. So other than that, I'm trying to think, that kind of covers those questions. But they do develop a palate. So the idea that they'll eat anything anytime is not quite accurate. They do have very specific tastes for a plant and in the plant growth. So whether they eat it when they prefer it when it's flowering. So it's just something to consider based on the plant. Someone said riparian areas, they will eat right down to the edge of a water body. So they're quite good at that. They don't love to be in boggy, wet conditions, but they will eat right down to the edge of water happily. So that was the other question. Anything else, Catherine, that I missed?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Just want to squeeze in one more question from Fiona. So with the 3 to 5 years of repeated grazing, or whatever the time frame was, is the Blackberry actually eradicated? Like, have the plants been suppressed by repeated grazing so that the root reserves have died out?
Well, I think the thing to know with this is, and I experienced the same thing with yellow flag iris, is that there is no cookbook. There's no recipe that you're guaranteed if you follow this, you will get this result. But with 3 to 5 years of repeated grazing, what the expectation is that then you continue to monitor the site and you treat as needed. So the plant now has gone from being, you know, this impenetrable 10-foot high, you know, just, we all know what that looks like, Blackberry. And then it might, after 3 to 5 years, be something where you're able now to spot spray it if you need to. Maybe now you're able to use your volunteer labor, or maybe you bring the goats in every 2 years or 3 years as need be. So there's no promise that it will be eradicated. You will need to monitor it and then adjust your treatment based on the condition of the plant. One statement in the technical report, and I should have written it down, but it was reduced at one site from like 97% to less than 5%. Something like that. So it's not completely eradicated, but it becomes manageable.
And then just a final note that Lori popped into the chat after the report was compiled. She contacted the BC Goat Association and the Fraser Valley Goat Breeders Association, and they have not identified any trained herds in the Lower Mainland, which is important. So I think with that, a big thank you to Catherine for presenting, and thanks for being here as well, Tammy, and giving us your perspective, and to Lori for the questions and additional information as well. So yeah, take care, Catherine. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe I'll see you at a yellow flag iris site near me at some point later this season.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Great. Well, we're right on time for our schedule here. Just a reminder, if you joined us a little bit late, that this session is being recorded. And so anybody registered will receive a link to the recording afterwards, along with any of the other links provided by myself or the presenters. So now it's that really exciting time in the agenda where we get to do our AGM. And I'm going to ask our chair, Melinda Yong, to join us. So Melinda, a few other directors, and myself are going to be sort of tag teaming this AGM portion, but Melinda is going to start us off.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Tasha, for organizing this event. And then also thank you to Catherine for that very interesting presentation. And then of course, thank you to Sophie, who will be presenting next. I do want to acknowledge that Burnaby is on the Coast Salish territory, and we are thankful to be here as well. So I'll start off with the first order of business is to approve our last AGM minutes from October 22nd, 2020, when we last met online. So I'll invite everybody now to vote to approve. Oh, sorry. The minutes. And so Tasha's popping up a poll on your screen. So select yay or nay.
Just going to give it another second or two before the voting stops. All right, thanks everybody. So I will share the results. Looks like we're in unanimous agreement that the AGM minutes from last year were approved.
Great, thank you. And now I'll invite members to now vote on to approve the May 1st. Sorry. So Tasha will now provide an overview of the last AGM and what we have planned for this year.
Great, thanks, Melinda. So in the interest of time, I'm just sharing a few kind of snapshots of kind of what our year's been like. Like many of you, we spent a lot of time on Zoom. This is a photo of a board meeting, and this is kind of how we get group shots these days, isn't it? We also held a really successful our second invasive species info session for contractors, contract holders, and other practitioners earlier this year. Really pleased that along with the Stanley Park Ecology Society, and shout out to my co-host Janine Johnstone, who's also on the call today, we launched a stewardship series last fall, which is an opportunity for folks who work on stewardship either as a volunteer or a staff member to gather together, do professional development, network, and learn about timely topics in the region. And so those series are continuing. You can check out our website for how to join those sessions. Also, we're pleased to have added to the suite of best management guides in Metro Vancouver. So we added American bullfrog and hedge bindweed. Larissa is going to pop the link to those resources into the chat. Also pleased that for all of the BMPs that exist, we have 2-page public fact sheets also available. So these are great resources for sending to the public rather than the really technical BMP guides. So a little overview of what's to come. So we're really excited that the ISCMV is one of the first partners to be involved with the Invasive Species Council of BC's Stronger BC project. And so we're lucky enough to have an action team that has been placed in the metro region from last month until July. And just want to give a shout out to the crew members who are on the call today, Brianna, Jamie, Claire, and Corbin, who I had the pleasure to meet online and in person this week. We're really excited that you guys are out there doing great work. Just a snapshot of my calendar here. We have so many events coming up. I probably say this every year, but this year, I don't know if you guys are feeling the same way, has been super busy, record number of calls and reports and presentations, which is great. So super busy time. We'll also be working on a land manager planning survey. So many regions do an in-person or an online planning meeting every year, but we decided with COVID and just the large number of jurisdictions that we have in the region that we're going to be doing a survey this year. So if that applies to you, watch for a survey in the coming months from us. We'll also be continuing our lake monitoring program, so monitoring for invasive mussels at high priority lakes. And also something that's been on my to-do list for a while, we are working on an application to become a registered charity under the Federal Income Tax Act. And my thanks to Hannah Lout, who's on the call, who's the contractor that's been really spearheading that project. And Hannah's been a longtime supporter of the ISCMV as a Hotspots crew member a decade ago. She's a former board member and has been volunteering a lot with us over the years. And it's with her steady guidance that we're working on that. And that's, yeah, the most exciting stuff that we have coming this year. So next, I would like to invite our treasurer, Fiona Steele, to get us started on the financial report.
Hi, everyone. At the AGM, we asked the membership to approve the financial statements from the previous fiscal year, as well as approve the budget for the current year. The statements we are presenting are available on the website if you want to take a look. So Tasha is going to provide a few highlights from the last fiscal year.
Sure, yeah. So if you care to take a closer look at the financials, you'll see that we benefited from about $21,500 in federal COVID-19 relief funding, which really allowed us a year ago to continue our activities in the spring without having to lay anyone off, which was a devastating prospect. So we're really thankful for that. The year-end statements also show a surplus of almost 17,000, which happens almost every year or in off years. And that's due to funding being received in an offset fiscal year to when the money is actually being spent. And so our year end is March 31st. So sometimes we receive money on either end of our fiscal year end, but it's really earmarked for a different fiscal year. So before we take a vote to accept the financial statements and also the proposed budget for the current fiscal year up until March 2022, does anyone have any questions? I'm also, and Fiona's also happy to answer questions at a later date as well, but we can answer anything here if anything's popping up. All right, seeing no questions, I'm going to launch our second poll. So this is asking you to approve the year-end financial statements as presented on the website. Great, thanks everybody. So I'll just close the poll and share the results. So again, unanimous that those financials were presented. I'm going to do the same thing now with a different poll. So this is to approve the proposed budget, which is also available on the website. All right, so you should see the third poll Coming up now, do you approve the 2021-2022 budget? All right, thanks everybody. And again, unanimous approval for the budget, which is great. Thank you so much. And now it is my honor to provide recognition and thank you to the many individuals and agencies who really make ISCMV what it is. So starting with this awesome group of people, this is a snapshot of the 2020-2021 board. Brian, Fiona, Guinevere, Elan, Julia, Carrie, Ken, Lori, Lisa, Melinda, Paul, Peggy, Scott, thank you all so much for the guidance and support you provide, especially for an organization as small as ours. We have a really small staff team, and so board members really have to step up and provide ongoing support to us. We're really excited that yeah, it's been a really great year working with all of you. Also want to thank staff. Here's another Zoom photo. This was taken at our year-end staff meeting in December. So you can see me there. You can see Isabel Gassior, who's been a long time ISCMV staff person. And as she introduced herself in the chat, she's taken a position at the City of Burnaby. So I'm super thrilled that I still get to work with her in a professional setting. So she's still around, although she's not our operations manager anymore. And really excited that Larissa Lau, who was our summer student last year, is now working as our operations coordinator. And she's been with us for over a month now. And it's just been my pleasure to work with her and to see her grow in her career. And thanks so much for everything you do, Larissa. And then also want to thank Kathy Ma-Green, who's the executive director of the Fraser Valley Invasive Species Society, who often works from our office. And Kathy and I work really closely together, and I really consider her a great colleague. And then finally, a big thanks to our partners, too many here to name, but many of you represent these agencies here. And this is just a testament to how much support we have within the region and even within the province. And so thanks to all of you for playing the important role that you do as our partners and supporters. So now I'm going to turn it over to our director, Paul Shapwinek, for the election portion of our AGM.
Hello, it's my pleasure to do this portion of the meeting, and it's going to be very simple because we have 5 positions open and we have 3 nominations, so it will be simply by acclamation. And so we have 3 returning directors, Julia Alards-Tomalin from Ecological and BCIT, Lisa Dreves from Langley Environmental Partners Society, and Scott Walmsley from the City of Port Coquitlam. So in the end with this, we're going to end up with pretty much, I think, exactly the same board that we've had the last couple of years, which is excellent. It's a great group of people to work with, and so it's my pleasure to welcome these people back to the board.
Great, thank you, Paul. Yes, lucky me, I get to work with the identical board that we had last year, which is really, really great. So we do have a couple positions vacant on the board. So if you are really interested in what you're hearing and want to become part of our team, there's still the possibility that our board could appoint additional directors throughout the year. So you can chat with me or any of the other directors about that. I'd like to just highlight a few upcoming events. So I mentioned that May is Invasive Species Action Month. So if you check out that website that Larissa shared earlier, you can see all the cool stuff that's happening throughout the province and also post events that you have. They also have kind of a media cheat sheet. So if you want to do some targeted social media or post about Invasive Species Action Month, there's a whole toolkit there where you can download resources to make that easy. The 2021 North American Invasive Species Forum, which is actually being hosted by the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, is happening online later this month, and there's the website. We will be hosting a European green crab lunchtime forum sometime later this year. And of course, as always, we'll be hosting a fall forum sometime in the fall. And depending on the state of the world, maybe it's possible that we could do really small field tours, or I've got some ideas of ways that we could make some possibly some in-person things work if some of the public health rules change. So please watch for those details to come. One of the really exciting public projects that we've been working on this year is a community art plant series. And so we have a series of 3 workshops that people can join, all about how to document plants. And so the first session was all about plant ID and collection. And the next 2 sessions we still have space for, and they're coming up. We have an Indigenous artist, photographer speaking on May 19th about how to photograph plants well. And then Isabel is actually leading the session on June 16th about botanical illustration. So if you or anybody in your network might be interested in those, you can visit our event website and follow the registration instructions there. They're totally free and anybody's welcome to join. So that concludes the AGM portion of today, but the event is not over. I am going to stop screen sharing and invite our next speaker to get her slides ready. I've been wanting Sophie to come and speak at one of our forums for a long time, so I'm really excited that she's here. She's worked in pest management field for over 20 years. Sophie Dessureault has been the Integrated Pest Management Coordinator for the Vancouver Parks Board of Parks and Recreation since 1998. And in that role, she's developed monitoring and treatment programs for many urban pest issues and worked with city and park staff to identify pest prevention options and improve maintenance programs, and also to engage with the public. She's been a really key partner in the Japanese beetle eradication program since the beginning. And she is well known and loved within the Metrovan invasive species world. And we're really excited to have you here to give us an update on the project. So welcome, Sophie.
Thank you very much. I guess before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And very happy to be here, and also really happy to be presenting to you guys about this. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you guys should see it. Japanese beetle. It's been 4 years, which is really quite staggering to me to realize that we've been working on this project for 4 years. But the cool thing is when I answer the question about how we're doing so far, you'll see that it's been a good 4 years. So I've got lots to say about the presentation. So I'm going to zoom through some of the stuff. If you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat and I'll try to, answer them at some point. So the Japanese beetle, it is native to Japan. And it was first discovered in North America in New Jersey in 1916. First showed up in Canada in 1939. So it's been in North America for a very long time, but up until 2017, it hadn't made its way to BC. So it stayed, on the East Coast. Of course, Quebec, Ontario have been dealing with it for decades, but we'd never actually caught it. So why is it a problem? Well, it can significantly damage quite a number of plants. It's got, a host range of over 250 plants, including many of our landscape plants, including also some agricultural crops like blueberries and grapevines, things like that. So it is a problem if it becomes established in our landscape. Here's the feeding damage that you see from adults. Now, we haven't seen much of this out here, and partly is because of our dwindling numbers. But the photo on the right is from Persicaria in Davidland Park. This was our first year of treatment that we had seen this damage. I became really excited when I saw that because Persicaria is in the knotweed family. And I was like, what if I could train them to just eat knotweed? But apparently they weren't listening to me. So the other picture is not one of ours, but it does show how extensive the damage can be from feeding damage. And the problem is, of course, is because these guys do aggregate to feed. And so, you know, they'll focus on a plant and really damage it. The beetle itself is really quite pretty. It's the metallic green and bronze color, about centimeter long. The really kind of key identifying features are those 6 white tufts of hairs along each side of the body that you can see in the picture. It's quite distinctive among our beetles. The grubs, well, they are a traditional C-shaped grub, you know, much like the European chafer, about 2.5 centimeters long. It's a little bit smaller than the chafer when fully grown. The problem, of course, is that all the C-shaped grubs, pretty much, all these white grubs pretty much look alike. So how do you tell it? From our resident bad boy, which pretty much anyone from the Lower Mainland will know, maybe not know it, you know, this up close, but you'll certainly know it from the turf damage around town. Well, you've got to look at the raster pattern. The raster pattern is the set of hairs that are on the tip of the underside of the abdomen. So the butt hairs. For the chafer has these 2 long lines that are slightly diverging V, whereas the Japanese beetle has this really short little V patterns of hairs. So really easy with just a magnifying glass and maybe a little bit of, you know, cold storage so that they don't wiggle too much. Really easy to learn how to identify the various beetles. So this is still from Eastern North America. Right now, our life cycle pattern is pretty much the same. We got the beetles the adult beetles that emerge in mid-June, although last year, because of the weather, it was a little bit later. We didn't see them until the end of June. This year, we might actually see them earlier because of that absolutely stunning weather we had in April, but we'll have to see. So they emerge in June, mate, lay their eggs. Eggs are back in the ground or hatch, or larvae hatch, sorry, in July, August, and then they grow throughout the winter time, and then will pupate in May and start all over again. So when we target control, of course, the easiest part of the life cycle to target is the grub stage. So why is it that this is such a problem? Well, when the Canadian Food Inspection Agency actually caught a live beetle in 2017, it was from, you know, routine traps that they put all over the province as just part of their annual surveillance. Once they caught that, of course, they started doing what's called a delimitation survey, and so they put out more traps in the area, and then started finding more beetles, and then, you know, it kind of expanded from there. So because it is highly invasive and destructive, and it's got such a wide host range, and also because it is still a regulated pest, this triggered a whole bunch of stuff, especially you know, movement restrictions and things like that. It also triggered various agencies to come together and try to figure out how to create an action plan that could actually address this problem and hopefully get rid of it. So in March 2018, thanks in great part to the Invasive Species Council of BC, we brought a whole bunch of stakeholders together and created an action plan, created a bunch of committees that would actually deal with various parts of this plan and start moving forward. So the committees were the steering, communication, treatment, movement control, and funding. Funding was later kind of absorbed into the steering committee meeting. But so we all got together and created a coordinated collaborative response. And honestly, this is one of I've been with the park board now, I was told 24 years. And I've worked with many agencies over the years, but this project has been so incredible because of the collaboration of all these various agencies, from nonprofits to private to all levels of government, that it's become a model for how to deal with invasive incursions like this. So we, I mean, you know, hundreds of hours of committee meetings, ongoing dialogue between these various partners, and a really cohesive plan that was developed and then implemented and continues to be implemented successfully across all these agencies. So here's the plan. This is kind of high level, and it's kind of how I'm going to be, structuring the rest of the presentation. It's going to be a mix of looking back at how we started as well as what we're doing currently. So the 5 basic aspects of the plan was to survey the area to figure out, where we're at, how many we've got, and where they are. Communicate this with the public, because that was one of the big fears, was that we were proposing to do large-scale applications of a pesticide product in our parks. And for anybody who's been, a Vancouverite or a Lower Mainland resident for a long time will know how crazy Vancouverites can be over pesticides. Finding, of course, the necessary resources to do that. As a parks, we have equipment to deal with things like golf courses, but we don't do wholesale applications of pesticides in the parks. So we had to find the equipment. Then, of course, controlling the spread, because any treatment we did would be pretty much pointless if we couldn't actually prevent this insect from spreading beyond where we had already found it. And then, of course, treating the infestation to, in the hopes of eradicating it. So one of the big things is right off the bat, we established roles and responsibilities for each of the groups. And we stuck to those roles and those responsibilities. And I think that was a great reason for our success. The province, of course, coordinates the public and private land treatments. Us, for the city and parks, we coordinate we actually apply the public lands treatment, also manage a temporary transfer station. I'll explain this in a bit. ISCBC, well, their work was incredible, because dealing with all of us was like herding cats. So they coordinated all the stakeholder meetings, the liaison, everything, and kept us on track for things. So it was awesome. They also found, helped find the funding that we needed. BCLNA, of course, was our industry liaison and supported the outreach to the landscapes, sector. And the CFIA led the surveillance, as well as the regulated area and the movement control. So the CFIA started by placing a ministerial order on that section of Vancouver to stop the movement of both soil and plants. And so the regulated area was designed to try to keep the infestation where it was. So for soil, since we couldn't actually really check when the larvae were going to be in the soil, and since they're there pretty much all year, soil cannot leave the restricted area without written permission and certain treatments or assurances that the soil will be dealt with properly. And then, so that's year round. And for when the beetle is flying, which is between June 15th and October 15th, movement of any above ground plants or plant parts is also restricted. So good news is that after the first year, so from the first to second year, the area was slightly adjusted. We added a little corner where Cornwall Avenue is. But since then, the restricted area has remained the same. We're not going to be reducing it until we've basically gotten rid of the infestation. So the survey, well, it's a trapping program that's used to detect the presence of the beetle. In 2020, a total of 2,507 traps were placed throughout the province. Over 2,300 of those were actually in Vancouver. They were checked at least 6 times over the course of the summer months. They look like that little, unexploded bomb that's dropped from a plane. Here's a last year's survey trap locations. If you can see the little red dots in the False Creek area, those are all our positive traps. Anything blue is just where a trap was. So there were a few placed on the island as well. Because of COVID, none on Sea to Sky or the Sunshine Coast last year. I think they're hoping to get some in this year, but I'm not quite sure yet. One thing they tried last year, which was really cool, is we were suffering in certain areas of the city some losses due to vandalism or theft of these traps. And so they piloted a project to put what we called canopy traps So they're hung from tree branches, anywhere from 7 to 10 feet up in the air, and left to to sit there. They're harder to monitor, unfortunately, because you got to take them down and everything. But here's the kicker: is these traps actually performed better, surprisingly better, than the ground traps. And so this year, the CFIA is planning to install a few more traps in other areas as well. So here's what the survey results look like for the last 4 years. 2017 was a partial year since it wasn't discovered. The beetles weren't discovered until July. So 2018 was the first full year of trapping. And the nice thing about the trapping is we haven't seen any increase outside of our epicenter, which is around David Lamb Park. So it's David Lamb, George Wayneburn, Coopers, and Charleston Park just to the south. And usually, 90 or better % of beetles are caught out of those parks. The really cool thing, so what this trapping is telling us is that the movement restriction is successful at preventing the spread outside of our epicenter. And then the really cool thing when you look at the numbers is that from 2018 to 2019, we saw an 86% reduction. And then from 2019 to 2020, we saw a further 82% reduction. This is telling us that our treatments are working. So unfortunately, we don't have the results for the 2020 treatments. We get those a year later when we do the trapping. So our numbers aren't going to start coming in until sometime in June when we get the first flight, and we won't see the full picture until October, until the end of the sampling season. But we are hopeful that we're going to see another really nice reduction. Of course, we're getting to really small numbers, right? We've only got 214 catches last year. So I'm wondering what we're going to catch this year, but we're excited about this. So one of the big things, like I mentioned, is developing the message. Is how are we going to communicate to people that this was necessary, that it would be done in a safe manner, that it wouldn't harm their kids and their pets and the environment as a whole. So we worked really hard that first year to actually develop some common messaging that included both, the regulated map as well as fact sheets, FAQ, joint media events. We did a lot of it, and we thought long and hard as to how we could alleviate people's fears. And one of the big things is getting that common messaging across all our partners. And so these are the different websites from the province, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, ISCBC, the BC Landscape Nursery Association, as well as Vancouver. We all had the same information, and we all pointed to each other to answer questions. And again, we stayed in our, that roles and responsibilities. We really stayed in our lanes when it came to answering questions. And so if it was something about a survey, we didn't answer them ourselves, we passed it on to CFIA. If it was for private lands, it went to the province. And so we really used that quite effectively. The treatment messaging, of course, that was my big fear, right? I did not know how Vancouverites were going to respond to this. So we did make the signage. We developed it specifically for the program. It was different from our regular park signage, and it was made to really grab people's attention. So, we put pictures, we made the colors bright. We really tried to actually get people to read the signs because they don't do that normally. And it worked. It really worked quite well. One of the other problems at startup, of course, was actually finding the equipment that we needed and the resources. So, setting up a temporary transfer station, getting bins and equipment, getting the boom sprayers for large turf treatments. We were looking at first year, I think it was around 30 hectares, and then it went up to almost 50 hectares. We needed some serious equipment to do that. And thanks to the steering committee, they found us funding, thanks to the province, because they actually bought most of these sprayers for us. We were able to actually get this equipment and get the work done quickly and super effectively. So then controlling the spread. So CFIA had brought this movement restriction, but how were we going to assist people in not actually breaking those restrictions? And so the city opened a temporary transfer station, and this will be our 4th year, opens from June 15th to October 15th. And landscapers, homeowners within the restricted area can bring their green waste. They can also bring small amounts of soil. We modified our green waste collection routes so that it matches the regulated area. And what happens to that green waste is it goes straight to the burner, right? Straight to the waste to energy facility in Burnaby to be incinerated. So that way we cut down on the risk of anything spreading. Any soil has to be taken to the landfill for deep burial. And we've been working hard with the landfill to make sure that they're on top of things. And if they have a question, they pick up the phone and they reach out for somebody to get those answers. So it's been really good. Now, the treatment, which is what I am personally responsible for. In 2018, we of course had to develop everything, right, from scratch. We had no treatment guidelines. We had never worked with the product on a large scale. And so we were kind of, had a lot of questions. So was thinking to be too wet, too dry. Now we were late starting in June, right? Or in 2018, we started in June simply because of, our meeting was in March, and by March we had to get equipment and everything else set up. So of course in June, we start seeing drought coming in and things like that. And so there was some concern over that. Also, what turf do we treat? Like at what size was it become, would it be a problem? And so we came up with some guidelines. Anything that was 1 by 1 meter solid turf with no gaps, we would treat. And then where the substrate was not going to be good for Japanese beetle, like crushed gravel, things like that, we didn't treat. And so we operated on that. Now, every year we meet with the Syngenta representative, and we also meet with the applicators. The province is the one who sets up the meeting, and have discussions over what to treat and how to update our treatment guidelines. And so every year we learn a little bit more, and we get a bit better. So on Syngenta's recommendations, they wanted the product to be down 90 days prior to the larvae being back in the ground, which meant that for us, it meant let's start treatment the first week of April. And so we started doing that. They also told us we didn't need the additional watering, that using the high water volumes was good. No fall treatment was necessary because at that point, the grubs are so big that the efficacy drops off quite quickly. So we were able to alleviate a lot of our concerns and fix things. Take you quickly through how our treatment map evolved. This was the first year. Based on the recommendations from the BC Plant Protection Advisory Council, we were treating a 200-meter radius from every positive trap catch. So in 2018, since this was our first season of treatments, the map ended up, this was, so all 5 zones are there. So we ended up getting 5 maps produced by the CFIA at that point. And it turned into a bit of a psychedelic show because these were all color-coded eventually. It was really hard getting the boundaries because we called it the bubble map, or the Mickey Mouse because of the ears in the middle. But it was hard for us to find the boundaries and things like that. So when 2019 rolled around, we actually snapped them to roadways, which made it a lot easier for us as well as the private lands contractors to figure out which addresses are within the treatment boundaries and which ones are outside. So as you can see, 2019, because we had a few more detections in 2018, we did expand the map. And then 2020, because if you notice between the stuff in Stanley Park, there's a couple of squares there, but between those squares and between English Bay, there's a lot of turf. So I asked for 2020, I asked them to just close the gap between them. And so we ended up treating, just basically connecting those large turf areas just on the off chance that something might be lurking there. So this was 2020. And then, our 2020 results came in for the survey and the numbers were down another 80%. And now we had a bunch of spots where we hadn't caught anything in over 2 years. And so based on the recommendations from the Plant Protection Advisory Council, we redrew our 2021 treatment map to include the last 2 years of survey. So the 2019 and the 2020 data. we were still targeting primarily the larvae, but we were also, as we did in 2020, targeting the adult beetles in areas where we suspected feeding damage. So this is what our map looked like this year. So really cool thing is we dropped a whole bunch of areas. Roughly, I haven't done the final calculations yet because we're not done treating, but I'm estimating right now that we've cut our treatment area by 50%. So really exciting for that. So the spring launch this year looked very much similar to last year and the year before. The province issued the notice to treat to the city, so parks, engineering, and real estate and facilities, which are our three main departments. The city issued an information bulletin to the media to kind of start up the season. That was on April 6th. There was a treatment operation meeting with the Syngenta rep. The province set this up again, and the applicators, that was April 8th. So again, a little bit weird this year because we were all virtual, right? Normally our treatment operation launch meeting is actually at a property, and we've got the equipment out there and we're spraying. And so this was just all virtual. And then BCLNA held another technical session for the landscapers. That was on April 28th, and that was quite well attended again. And so that was to answer any questions that the landscaping community had. So the product we're using, again, is a Celiprin. It is a reduced risk product that is quite effective against the white grubs, and has no impact on non-targets like people, kids, pets, birds. And because of the timing of our application and how we're applying it, we also have little impact on any other insects in the area. So that's a good thing. It is a soil drench, and we do one application per year. So public lands, this includes parks, engineering lands, which are boulevards and medians, and real estate and facilities lands, which are some of the other civic buildings that are run by the city and not parks. So treatment was done by park staff, so using our boom sprayers, and a hired contractor, once again, Paris-based landscaping, to do anything that the boom sprayers couldn't reach. So again, we didn't close parks, which was, really important to me that we didn't, especially in COVID times, that we didn't prevent people from coming out to the parks. So we had a lot of park staff there to support the applicators, to keep folks off the turf, inform them of where to go and what to do. We received very few complaints and inquiries again, so it's been good. We use the treatment book. So this I developed on the first year. It's got maps and areas of all our parks that we're treating, as well as the scheduled with the assigned staff. So very useful for us to use, and for our applicators. We shared this, of course, with our applicating team. So it worked very well. So this year, thanks to that reduced map, we went from treating 31 parks to treating 20 parks. So that was really good. And, hoping next year we'll be cutting that down a little bit more. For private lands, commercial applicators reached out to landowners. The city provided lists of addresses and contacts. And with the help of the ISCBC Japanese Beetle ambassadors, they spoke to everybody to receive support consent to treat. We received almost 100% support. So they began again the Celiprin treatments in early April. Most of the sites now are in their 4th year of treatments, so that's great. We're not done yet, so I can't really report on any of that because we're still working through private lands and some of the public lands. But this shows one of the web application that the province created to record the treatments. And every year they bring little new improvements, like adding those boulevard strips to the map, so that where properties aren't being treated, but there is a public boulevard, the applicators can still record it in the app. So how much did we use? Well, like I said, don't have numbers for this year yet, but so 2018 we treated 40 hectares with 32 liters, went up to 58 hectares last year. The reason why our usage was a little bit lower was because every year we get better and more efficient at what we do. So the challenges, well, the pandemic, that was our biggest challenges. Everything else we pretty much figured out the first year and implemented the second year. The pandemic did throw us for a loop. Staffing levels, the inability to run 2 crews, safety protocols, both with handling the equipment and handling people, reactions to the public. So one of the big fears was that, of course, we were going to close the parks, and this was the only place people could go out to. So that was a big fear. Of course, that was alleviated when we told them that there was no restricted access, not really. One of the things for private properties, of course, was that property owners weren't actually responding. Our successes, though, of course, was treating through the pandemic. Our treatment was successful last year. It was successful this year. It went even better this year than last year. We had continued support from the public. This year was just insane when it came to the weather. Of course, that kind of played against us because we had a lot more people in the parks than we did in previous years, right? Like, to tell you the truth, I like treating when there's just a drizzle, or it's kind of gray and a little bit cool, because
All right, I think I lost internet for a little bit there. Is that everything, Sophie? Yeah, can you guys hear me? All right, did we lose Sophie? Are you still there? I'm not sure if you were frozen or if I was. Okay. Oh, okay, okay. I guess we all lost you, Sophie. Were you close to the end of your presentation?
Yeah, I have 2 more slides.
Okay.
Let me reshare. Sorry about that. My internet just decided to jump out.
No
the window.
worries. I thought it was me because mine cuts out a little bit as well.
At least the when it cut out, you guys didn't hear me swear up a storm.
Missed it.
Missed it. Yeah. So the next step for us for this year, of course, is our foliar treatments. So a few years ago, we got a BT product for beetles, BTG, Bacillus thuringiensis galeriae, which, like the other BTs, has to be consumed by the beetles to be effective. And since our adult beetles are leaf feeders, we can apply the BT to the plants around our epicenter, and hopefully have an impact. We can't really monitor for this because we're not, we can't, if the beetles are dead, then we don't see them. But we're still doing it. And so this is the areas, it's all the landscape beds around David Land Park, the end of Drake Street, like where our center, where we get the most trap catches. We didn't see any feeding, we know from the previous years, and any place where we knew we had plants that were susceptible, and we went for it. So that will be happening at peak flight, so sometime in mid to late July, and we'll go into August. We'll do 4 to 5 treatments. And I still use this one because this was too funny. This was back in 2018 from a post on a Pokemon Go user group. We had just treated Thornton Park, and there was an event where these guys were spawning, and apparently none of them were spawning in the park. So thank you very much. That's it.
Great, thanks, Sophie. So we're getting close to the end, but we probably have time for one question. Yeah, one from Lori. Great summary, encouraging to see such excellent collaboration and positive results. Well done. The treatment area has decreased for 2021, but has the regulated area changed this year?
No, the CFA will not change the regulated area, likely until after we've stopped treating. So just as a precautionary, we're not shrinking it.
Okay. Great. And I have a question for you too, Sophie, but maybe I'll just wrap up, and if you don't mind hanging around for a moment afterwards. Thank you so much for attending the event today. I would like to thank both of our guest speakers, Sophie and Catherine, for taking time out of what, again, is a really busy time for everyone to put their presentations together and prepare for us. Thanks to all the directors and my forum organizing committee who helped me behind the scenes on these events, and my great appreciation to all of you who I know are super busy. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again. If you have any